Hi and welcome, I'm Dr. Phil Parker, the health and happiness expert, and today we're starting on an amazing course all about NLP and coaching, which I hope you'll get so much out of. It's going to answer so many questions you might have about NLP, coaching, but also about how does stuff work? How do our brains work? How do relationships work? How do we get stuck? How do we make change? A whole range of stuff, really practical, interesting stuff that I think will change your life. Couple of things to know before we go. First of all, this is not a practitioner training course. Although it is the starting point of a practitioner training course, these 10 units will not equip you to be a practitioner. It's really about personal development for this course. Applying the skills of NLP and coaching to yourself to see what changes you can make to yourself and your loved ones around you just by being different. If you already are a practitioner, then you can use these skills and work with clients with them to add on to your existing skill set. But if you want to become a practitioner, this is the building block that develops into a bigger course. But it is also a standalone course, so just doing these 10 units will make such a difference to how you feel about yourself, how you see the world, how you interact with other people, how you build relationships, just so much stuff. One of the things I say about this course is it's like when I was at school, I learnt loads of stuff. So I learnt trigonometry, I learnt a bit of Latin, I learnt some physics, most of which I've never used again since I left school. But they didn't teach me some stuff I really needed to learn. They didn't teach me how to deal with difficult bosses or relationships or fill in tax returns or how to deal with criticism or when things didn't quite go my way, or being a parent, or most of the things that many of us find quite challenging. And that's what we're going to be looking at, the things you never got taught at school but wish that you had. So what I recommend you do, pause the video in just a second, get some stuff together, so pen and paper, but also if you can get hold of a recording device, something you can record, particularly video would be great, because some of the exercises would be really useful to watch what's going on with your body, your voice tone, and recording is a really good way to do that. You will be doing some interactive exercises with other people on the forum that will put you towards. I'll be giving you some general feedback from my experience, and there's also an interactive session right at the end of these 10 units as well. But videoing it as you go along, little exercises will be really valuable for you. So get hold of that. It could be a phone, an iPad, camera on your laptop or computer. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world, but if you can get hold of one, that would be really useful. So get that together, pause the video, and then come back when you're ready, and we'll take you on the next segment of what you can do to completely open up, revolutionize the way you think about yourself and the world. So the first topic we're going to look at is NLP. So NLP is an amazing approach to understanding how humans work, and it's quite a long title, so it's worth breaking down and describing what we're talking about. Easiest way I think to describe it is to look at the 3 letters of NLP. N is for neuro, L for linguistic, and P for programming. So N stands for neurology or neuro. And with neuro, we're talking about our nervous system. So that's the way our brain, which is obviously mostly in our head, communicates with the rest of our body. So our brain is processing all sorts of signals that are coming up from our body. So when it's cold on our hands, we send a message up a nerve into our brain that processes that. And then there's also messages going down from our brain to our body telling it what to do, to move, to digest in a different way, to release hormones. So our brain is busy communicating and managing and controlling and taking care of our body. But of course, our brain is doing a bunch of other things as well. Our brain is also not only communicating internally, it's also communicating with other people, and it's of course receiving information from what's going on around us. So our brain is constantly processing all that information about our internal and external environment, and also it's thinking and experiencing emotion. So that's our neuro. Our linguistics, the L, is all about language. So, and it's not just about language in terms of what we speak, what we say. It's also about non-verbal communication, non-verbal ways of expressing things. So we know that so much of what we say, and we'll come to this later on, is not even said in words. Our non-verbal communication is huge. So we've got our communication to other people. We've got the communication within our nervous system, which is how linguistics link to the neuro, but also we've got the communication we do with ourselves, our internal conversation. And quite often, our internal conversation is something that is not as great as it could be. A lot of people spend a lot of time talking themselves down, giving themselves a hard time, and that's something we're definitely going to look at. So that's our N and our L, neuro-linguistic. Final thing is the P for programming. So the word programming really comes from one of the kind of co-designers of the NLP world, which is Richard Bandler, who was a computer scientist. And the idea is, okay, well, if the brain is a bit like a computer is only as good as the software that's running within it. So if you have a computer like I've got in front of me and it's got viruses in it, then that will really affect how the brain, computer's brain, works and processes and what it does. Our brain's the same. We run on patterns. We're constantly recognizing patterns. We're constantly looking for things, trying to understand how does that fit with that. We're almost like a pattern recognition machine. And that's a really useful thing. A lot of the programs, a lot of the patterns that we get used to help us to be really effective at making quick decisions about stuff. Those of you who know about predictive text will know this predictive text is an amazing thing. It's an amazing time-saving thing. You type in a couple of letters and your phone or your computer guesses what the next word is likely to be. But of course, there are some times when that program, that pattern, that expectation, that guess is completely wrong and gets us into all sorts of trouble. And our brain's patterns are a bit the same. Some of the programs we run are amazing, time-saving, brilliant, like learning to speak, learning to type, learning to play the piano. And some of them are not so good, not so useful, like suddenly finding ourselves behaving like a teenager when we go back to our mum and dad's house, or getting into an argument that we kind of are quite familiar with and we can feel ourselves going down in that direction, but we feel kind of powerless to stop it. Another example, of course, is that thing where you drive and you head off to work and you end up at the local supermarket by mistake. And yet, whilst you've been doing that, you've been completely able to manage all the junctions, but you're on automatic pilot. You're one of those patterns, one of those programs. So we use programs and patterns a lot in our functioning. We can't be consciously aware of everything we do all the time. Sometimes those programs that have become unconscious are not very useful for us. One of the things that NLP is really interested in is how does N, L and P all link together? How is our neurology affected by language and communication? And what programs are running kind of in the background that are setting up not great ways of us using our neurology or our communication? Problem is, of course, with a lot of these programs, we don't even notice them. We may notice the effects of them. Well, how does that happen again? We don't notice it when it's happening. NLP helps us to identify what is going on and to look under the bonnet, look under the hood, and start to change some of those programs. We are always going to have programs, we're always going to have patterns, ways of thinking. Have we got the programs and patterns that work for us? Are these the useful ones? Or do they belong to a time in the past where maybe it was useful when we were a kid? You know, let's say when you're a kid, you don't get what you want and you scream and shout and lie on the floor and stamp and yell, and eventually someone maybe gives you something nice. That's great. It kind of works a bit, not for very long, but it works a bit. If you do that, if you're a brain surgeon, when something doesn't go right, you lie on the floor of the operating theatre screaming and shouting and yelling, it's not so useful anymore. So often patterns, behaviours, programs have a time-limited kind of sell-by date, but often we forget that and we keep using programs and patterns that aren't very useful for us. So just pause for a second, just pause the video and just have a quick think about NLP and particularly the P. What programs, where do you find yourself operating on kind of automatic pilot in a way that isn't that great for you? And when you've done that, restart the video. Okay, so what did you find? What programs are you running? Is it that you find yourself getting cross or irritated or stressed in certain situations? Is it you find yourself doubting yourself in other places? Is it you find yourself not very comfortable around certain people? A lot of these things will be examples of programming. We'll be looking at these as we go through it. The other thing we're going to really focus on is change. And the reason we need to do that is change is one of those things they say is a constant, like death, taxes, and change are something we're always going to have to deal with. But when you think about it, so many people have problems with change. What problems do people have? Well, they often think, I wish things would change. I wish they would change quicker. I wish they would change more slowly. I wish they wouldn't change. I wish it wasn't this kind of change. The organisation is trying to put change on me, or I wish this organisation would change, but not in that way, in this way. This is the wrong kind of change. So people have all sorts of conversations about change. They often don't like it. It's not the kind of change they want, or it's the wrong kind of change, or it's not happening. They also feel that very often change is really tricky. So if you ask people what do you think about change, you'll usually get an answer like, well, some change is nice and some change is not so nice. Some change is easy and some change is tricky. Some change is difficult. And that's kind of an interesting thing to say, because if one thing is easy to change, then the process of change, whatever that is, suggests it can be an easy process. And we're going to look at this a lot on how do we make change easy. And yet it's also clear that a lot of people are stuck feeling that the thing they want to change is almost impossible. So how does that work? Well, we're going to explore how change works, what makes change easy, what makes it difficult, how you can help yourself and others to make change. And we're also going to look at the neuroscience of change. What is going around the back, what's happening in our brain when change occurs. Because I bet there are some things in your life, huge things, that you have changed. Whether it's leaving a job, starting a new relationship, moving country, taking up a new hobby, thinking differently, signing your name in a different way. And seeing as we're talking about signing your name, I'd like you to just notice what happens when you sign your name. Just sign your name. Okay. And then I'd like you to just imagine doing it with your nose, probably something you've never done before. But you'll probably find you can actually sign your name pretty easily with your nose. And you can also do it with your knee. Lift your knee up and be able to sign your name with your knee. Your brain has this amazing capacity to transfer skills from one part to another, and we're going to utilize that. I'd like to try another exercise as well, which is lift your right foot up just slightly off the ground and rotate it clockwise. Just keep on turning it in a kind of clockwise circle. Then at the same time, take the hand that you write with and just draw in the sky a 6. And notice as you draw a 6, what happens to your foot. You'll find your foot will change in direction in which it's rotating. Again, our brain does all sorts of interesting things. These are great examples of programs and patterns that are going on around the back without us really paying attention, but they are happening in our nervous system. Next thing is to think about, okay, well, you're going to be going on this journey. Who else is going to be on the course and why are they here? Well, some people come on the course because they just heard about NLP and coaching. They think that's a really interesting thing. I'd like to learn more about that. Just a general kind of interest. Other people are coming on the course because they've done something called the lightning process and they want to understand a bit more about what is underneath the bonnet of the lightning process, and NLP and coaching are part of that, so they can deepen their skills and become even more fluent in their lightning process skills. If you want to know more about the lightning process, then hop off to the website. You can find out more about that. Pause the video if you need to. Some people are doing the course because they already are professionals and they want to add this skill set into what they do already, so doctors, physios, counsellors and so on. And some people are doing the course because, as I say, this is a building block, first part of a longer course which trains people to be extraordinary practitioners in the field. So if any of those things are true for you, you've come to the right place, because the course is completely delivered to meet every single one of those outcomes. One of the things we hope as you watch this is that you go, you know what, this is so interesting. I would love to do even more of that, and come and join us to do more courses, because, as I say, this is a starting block, and like Lego, you can add other bits of courses that we do to build on these skills. We're also going to be looking at how you build great relationships. Now, building great relationships is a really important thing to do. There's, again, lots of research that says if you have a great relationship, and that doesn't just mean, intimate husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend type thing. That's very, very important. But relationships in general are really good for us. They affect our longevity, our cardiovascular health, the amount of oxytocin we produce, the size of our amygdala, all sorts of things are changed by our social networks. So building good relationships from that point of view is great. But also we've got the kind of relationships that are customer, client, boss, employee kind of relationships. And we're going to be looking at what is the glue, or what is the magic that makes those kind of relationships thrive and become really, really healthy and rewarding for everybody. Again, something I never got taught at school, would be really useful to have known. How do you build great relationships? We're going to be looking at that. And surrounding all this and weaving in and out, we're going to be focusing on how language makes your brain work differently, and how your language affects other people's moods, other people's mindsets, other people's neurology. Understanding that could be really useful to notice when you are setting yourself into bad neurology with the language that you're using, how it's affecting your health, your performance, and also when you've been using language that has been triggering and tripping other people's nervous systems into not very good spaces, and how we can change that. So we're going to spend a huge amount of time learning how to speak in a really, really brilliant way to ourselves and to others. So that's what we're going to be doing. Take a pause for a minute. You don't want to spend too much time watching this, just dousing your neurology and then the photons from the screen. So take a quick pause and then come back. Welcome back. Next thing I want to show you is a fabulous little video that I've seen a lot of times and I love it. It's all about a guy who's been an astronaut with NASA. He's been in the space station for a while, and then he comes back down to Earth, and some very interesting things start to happen. So just check this out and then we'll talk about it in a sec.
So after the astronauts get back from the space station, it usually takes them a while to get adjusted to life on Earth.
Launch on the Soyuz is amazing, quite a bit different from the shuttle. You know, the Soyuz is a bit more like...
You know, with the whole gravity thing?
Sorry. The Soyuz actually is a bit shaped like this pin, and it goes up straight up through the atmosphere. Now, you know, you've got the space station right up there. It's doing gravity.
Wow. What do you make of that? So this guy's been up in the space station for a while, for sure. But something has really happened in that his worldview on gravity, which is something that you and I completely take for granted, because he's been in a kind of gravity-free zone up in the space station. He's had enough time to acclimatize to that different version of the world that when he comes back down, he completely forgets that the rules of gravity apply on Earth. So he drops his cup, he holds a pen. A few seconds later, the same thing happens. And if you go back to it, look at where he looks for these missing objects. So he drops his cup. Well, he doesn't drop it, he lets go of his cup. He's talking about something else. And when he comes back, his cup's not there like you'd expect. And then he kind of looks everywhere for it. He doesn't even hear it hit the ground. He's so blocked out. And one of the last places he looks is downwards. That's amazing that he's so lost his relationship to reality or gravity on Earth just by being up in the space station for a bit. It really shows us how much brains can change. That question I asked earlier about change, is change hard or difficult? You'd imagine forgetting about gravity would be pretty tough. He's managed to forget about it and completely buy into a new version of reality of no gravity on the space station. So much so when he comes back to Earth, He's forgotten that gravity exists on Earth. Watch that video again if you want, and you'll see he just does exactly the same thing with the pen. He can't find it. He doesn't think to look down. He's so forgotten that. This reminds us, and we're going to keep on coming back to that video and other videos and other examples of how much change occurs. Even stuff that we've learned for a very, very long time can change like that. So maybe rewatch the NASA video, look at where he's looking for those missing objects, and come back in a second. Now, the NASA video is a really great example of how the brain learns. Not only the guy forgetting about gravity and having to relearn, but of ways we learn when we're learning something new, like NLP and coaching. One of the things I would recommend you do as I go through is anytime you hear me telling you a little story or anecdote, just write down a little tiny fragment of that story. So, having watched the NASA, if you've got a notebook and pen, just write down the word NASA guy. Now, what will happen is when you're looking back through those notes, assuming that you do, you'll see the word NASA guy, the words NASA guy, and it will immediately remind you of the whole of both the video and the conversation we had around it. Without having to write copious notes, just the word NASA guy will remind you of the video and the experience. So anytime you hear me telling a story or an anecdote, and I'll tell loads of them, it's something I do a lot as part of the training process, just write down a core phrase that will key you back into that, and you'll find that will really help you in your recall. Also, you'll find from time to time I'll say things in an interesting way, and you'll hear them, and I'll point them out to you, but you will hear them. Write those down as well. Luckily you've got the video, so you can just go back and a couple of seconds and re-listen and write it down word for word and borrow some of those phrases that I will be giving you that are great ways to help you change your neurology. The other thing I would recommend you do as you kind of come into any new course is think about what you already know about. Because whatever you're bringing to this course, you will have a whole range of skills, a whole range of brilliant skills that will help you to connect with these new skills. So instead of thinking, oh, this is really different, think, how is this similar and what do I know about this that will help me to support these learnings that I'm making now? So, keeping your eye on stories, on words that I use, let's move to the next section. Okay, in this section I'm going to ask you some questions, then you're going to pause the video, answer the questions, recording yourself as you do it, and then we're going to come back and explain why. So first of all, what are the questions? Well, here they are. They should be coming up on screen now. First question is, what is the colour of your bedroom? So that's the first question you're going to ask yourself. The second question is, what's your first career? And that means, what did you want to do when you were little? So the earliest memory you have of being a ballet dancer, wanting to be a ballet dancer or an astronaut or a fireman or even an accountant, whatever it is for you when you were young that you remember, oh, I really wanted to be that. Next is an important momentous event or decision, so something for you that really stands out as a significant moment in your life. The next thing is this. Any ideas what that is? I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. It is your postcode backwards. So for this part of the exercise, you're going to say your postcode backwards without writing it down and reading it back, to say it out loud from your memory, to say it backwards. So starting at the end and going all the way to the beginning. The next question is this: friends, my ring, diamond you buy. Any idea what this one is? Some of you will know this. It's a Beatles song, which is this is the first line of Money Can't Buy You Love. I buy you diamond rings, my friend. what I'd like you to do for this exercise is to choose a song that you know well. It could be Happy Birthday or the national anthem or a kid's tune from a nursery rhyme, and to say a couple of lines or the chorus of it backwards. Again, without writing it down, just thinking about the song, saying the words backwards. And the final thing, within 5, a maximum of 5, here it is, 5 words, ask yourself, what made me train? What made me take this course? And keep your answer to 5 words. Say it, and you can write that down once you've said it. So do the exercise, it won't take you that long. And when you've done it, make sure you video it as well. Come back and I'll explain why on earth I've asked you these quite bizarre and unusual questions. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the exercise. What we're going to look at now is why on earth I was asking you these slightly strange and bizarre questions. Well, in fact, these questions are so important, so significant for everything we're teaching on the course and so much else. So let's have a look at them. First of all, we asked you, what colour is your bedroom? Now, what's interesting about this question is, how do you answer it? How do you remember what colour your bedroom is? Because it's not a question you get asked very often. You may have just decorated your bedroom, so it may be easy to remember. For most people, what they'll need to do is kind of take themselves back to their bedroom and look around in their mind. So they remove themselves from being here, and they go on a little search called a transderivational search, if you're interested, to find out the answer to this particular question. We can see this as well when we say to you, when you open your front door, which way does it open? Where are the hinges? Well, normally you have to kind of go, turn it like that, push it like that, so the hinges are there. Or when you go into your bedroom, where are the light switches? And you'll kind of reach for it, and that's how you'll remember it. Because we don't have to keep that memory available to us all the time, so we just store it, and we recall it, often by remembering it in this kind of way. What's interesting is as soon as we do that, we disappear from being here, and we go on a little journey inside our head where we find out the answer. The same with the question, what was your first career? What do you want to do when you were tiny, when you were young? Well, when we ask that question, if you go far enough back to when you were 5, 6, 7, then again you disappear. You're not here anymore. You're back on a little journey, and on that little journey, you remember what it was like to have that conversation. Find that memory. Disappear from being here, going inside, focusing inside on a particular thing. When we ask you a question about, a big, significant, momentous event or decision in your life, there's a couple of really interesting things that happen. First of all, you will choose something that is of importance to you. And when you choose that, everybody has an answer. Everybody has something that's important to them. And the structure of the question is such that it allows for a range of answers so that everybody can go, yeah, I've got one of these. Now, that's quite cool on the question, to have a question that everybody can find an answer for. So sometimes I'll be teaching this course and one person sitting there will say, the day I got married. And the person next to them will say, the day I got divorced, the day I had kids, the day they left home, the day I moved country, the day I arrived in a country. It doesn't matter what the answer is. Different people will have different experiences, but they will all be significant, big, important moments in their life. Now, what's interesting is if the moment you've chosen is a positive moment, because of course some people may have chosen negative moments, some have chosen positive. When you connect with the positive memory, an interesting feeling occurs, and this will be true for you. If you connected with something, it was like, wow, that moment where everything shifted, then reconnecting with it will bring some of those feelings coming back. You'll get the neurotransmitters, the nerve cells will spark up, you'll get some hormones released. So if it's a happy time, you'll start to feel a bit happy. If it's an excited time, you'll start to feel a bit excited. If you've chosen something that is less positive, then you might feel some of those feelings too. So it kind of depends where you're pointing your brain. And this raises a really interesting question. How much of the time are we focusing up on extraordinary moments in our lives? Because when you look at it, you've got a library of a range of amazing experiences. But how much of the time do you think about them? How much of the time do you think about that amazing holiday, that mountaintop view, that brilliant time with friends, that wedding day, whatever you've chosen, compared to how much time do you think about, oh, I must put the cat out, I must go shopping, oh, that isn't working, I have to repaint that wall, oh, I've got those exams to take. Stuff. How much time do we fill up our brain with the stuff, and how much time do we spend thinking about the brilliant things that will actually engage our neurology and make us feel different? We're coming back to this time and time again, because we have this incredible set of resources, amazing experiences, incredible memories, and yet hardly ever, for most people, hardly ever do we go in there, do we dust that off and connect with that. What would happen if we did? What if we spent more time connecting with that? What would life be like? And then we've got the postcode backwards. Now, if you found that easy, that's great, but for most people, they'll find it quite difficult. And the reason is we have a bit of neurology that has a kind of store of this postcode backwards. And if you don't live in the UK, you can do it with a phone number. So we have this postcode written almost in our mind and in a direction. And when we ask you to do it the other way around, we don't have the neurology for it. And so you'll see, if you watch the video of yourself doing this, you'll see people doing all sorts of interesting things to try and build this pathway. They'll go things like da 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 da, na na na. And sometimes you'll see people, like when we're at school, you know, when people are learning to draw letters, they're so concentrated they'll do things like they'll stick their tongue out as they try and draw an S. Or they'll try. Often see kids kind of contorting themselves to try and get their neurology working. You'll see this as you try and bring your postcode backwards. There's lots of movements of this, tutting, all sorts of stuff. And yet, if you practice this simple exercise 4 or 5 times, you'll find that you become really good at it. I'm going to do this in a minute. I'm going to get you to do it again, video it, with you doing it 4 or 5 times, and you'll find yourself going da 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 da. You do it again. Da 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 da. And eventually it will start to flow. And as you get to that flow point where it's just easy, you'll find that a lot of this kind of movement that happens and pointing just disappears, and you go da 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 da. Okay? So pause the video for a minute, practice your postcode backwards 4 or 5 times, and you'll find things look quite different when you record yourself. Watch yourself at the end when you've done it a few times, and then come back to the video. Excellent. So you've done that. What you should notice is the more you practice, the more fluid it becomes, the easier it flows, the less movement you see as you do it. And what you're seeing here is your brain producing a new pathway, creating new nerve cells, new connections that allow you to say your postcode backwards. Not the most useful skill in the world, but it shows you, first of all, what change feels like, that difficulty when you start, and with practice, how then suddenly it becomes something you're very familiar. Final question, or 2 final questions. One was saying a song backwards again. People find that really, really difficult because songs are very much coded in one direction. When you play a record or a tape or even an MP3 backwards, it doesn't sound anything like how it sounded forwards. And we're so used to having it being in one direction. It's quite a challenge for many people to jump it backwards. But see how you get on with that. And the final question was, what made you train and stick to 5 words maximum? What I'd like you to do is just notice what you wrote down and check, was it 5 words or less? What's interesting is when you give the people the instruction, keep it to 5 words, for most people that means somewhere between 3 and 7 will probably do. Yeah. So people will kind of go, if I do 6, it's okay. It's close enough to 5. And this is how humans are about rules. We're pretty bad at following rules. So let's say, who has ever broken the law? And we're not going to judge you on this. And we're not talking about like kidnapping or extortion or anything like that. Just, have you ever driven a car in a 30-mile-an-hour zone at 31 miles an hour? Have you ever done anything like that? If you have, then you're quite normal. That's what people do. So classically, if people park somewhere they're not supposed to, so in the UK, that's double yellow line. So they park on a double yellow line, and then a traffic warden comes and puts a notice parking fine on their windscreen. What's the first thing they say? They say something like, "I was just here for a sec. Come on, let me out. I'm going now." As though if you break the law, break the rule, plus you have a really good reason, it means it's okay. It's just not the way it works, but that's how we hope it works. We also think rules don't generally apply to us. But there's a really interesting thing about this, and it calls up something that humans really, really hate, which is humans hate being wrong or being told that they're wrong. They'll do almost anything they can to avoid somebody saying, "You're wrong." And in fact, when somebody says or suggests that we're wrong, what's our first response? Not normally to go, "Oh, thank you very much, very useful feedback." Normally what we say is, "I think you'll find if somebody's wrong here, it's not me, it's got to be you." People really will do almost anything. And quite often the decisions they make around that are not great. Again, it's a good example of programs and patterns. I was on a flight once, flying back from the Caribbean to the UK. Quite a long flight, 8 hours I think. Got on the airplane, sat in the seats, and there was a guy in front of me, and in front of him there was another guy and his kids. And the kids were doing that thing that sometimes kids do, and they rock backwards and forwards against the headrest of the chair behind them. We hadn't even taken off yet, our seatbelts weren't even on, they hadn't even done the safety announcement, so right before the flight even thought about taking off. And the guy in front of me, whose chair was being slightly bashed by this kid, stood up, tapped the guy in front of him on the shoulder, and he said, "Do you not know how to raise children properly? You're just a bad dad." Now, you say that to a parent, you're going to get some kind of a response. So this guy stands up, turns around, says, "Do you want to say that again? Do you want to make something of it? Do you want to have a fight about this?" And the guy behind me goes, "Yeah, I do." So now we've got two people very much taking the position of someone's wrong here. It's not me, it's you, but they're both doing the same, and it's escalating. And they've got this 8-hour flight in front of themselves where they're going to be in close proximity. But that counts for nothing, because somebody's accused them of being wrong, and they need to tell them how wrong that person is. And the air stewardesses are running down the aisle, going to go, "What are we going to do to manage this?" And they separate them and put them in different parts of the plane. But we can know, we'll come to this in a minute when we talk about states, there's something interesting going on in states, the state of mind that people are in, and also this whole ability to get very, very irritated when somebody accuses us, even suggests that in some way what we've said or done is wrong. So pay attention to that. We'll be also coming up to really, really important question that is part of this conversation. A question that many people use and is incredibly destructive in relationships. And we're going to look at what that might be in just a minute. So the next topic, super important, is states. Probably one of the most important things I could ever talk you through is the power and importance of states. So what do I mean by states? Well, states means what mood you're in, what mindset you're in, where your focus of attention is, which parts of your brain are waking up and working. And what's interesting about humans is we're always in one state of mind or another. So as you're listening to this, you might be going, "What a lovely blue room he's got," or "What a fabulous suit jacket," or "I wonder what the rest of his body looks like because we only see the top half," or "This is really interesting," or "This is really dull," or "I must go and feed my cat," or "Is it time to walk the dog," or "What's the weather like?" All these things are where your focus of attention is, and these are all states. States include being angry, being sad, being excited, being happy, procrastinating, being focused, being motivated. Everything is a state. So humans are always in one state, but the big question, and I would recommend you write this down, that you need to check in with is the state that humans are in, It's the state you're in, you're a human. The most useful for whatever you're doing right now. So is the state you're in the most useful for whatever you're doing right now? And as you look at humans generally, you've met a few of them. What's the answer to that? Are most humans in the most useful state for whatever they're doing? And the answer is clearly no. I don't know if you've ever been in this kind of situation where you're in a queue. Let's say you're going to the airport and you find yourself in a massive traffic jam. And you can look at this, this row of cars in front of you, and you know it's going to be touch and go if you're going to get your flight. When this happens, how do we start to feel? What state do we get into? Well, you know the answer. It's anxious, stressed, frustrated, irritated, frantic, annoyed, desperate. What's interesting is this state, many of us have been in it at various places in our lives, really isn't that useful for that moment. It doesn't improve the way that traffic flows. It doesn't make it somehow a passing of the ways and the car is just ushered forward because we're stressed. Instead, what tends to happen when we're stressed or anxious or angry or frustrated is we start to make not very good decisions. We start to, I think there's a shortcut here which actually takes you to the end or to the start of the queue again. Or you start to have an argument with your partner, why are we late? Or you make some error in your driving and you maybe hit somebody else. But either way, it's not useful. It doesn't help the situation, and it probably is going to make the situation worse. So this is a good example of a human, me, you, not being in a very useful state for a particular situation. And this is another key thing. When we are in those states, most of us have no idea how to switch from that state to a more useful state. We also don't often notice it at the time. We feel it, but we don't kind of recognize we're in the wrong state. There's another really important thing about states. Have you ever found yourself thinking, you know what, I wish I had a bit more time to be grateful for the things in life, to notice the flowers and the sky and, recognize all the things I have that are great. Well, in fact, being in a traffic jam is the ideal time to do that. There's not much else you can do. But most people are not sitting in that traffic jam being able to shift themselves into a really useful state for that situation, a time when there's nothing else they can do to connect with this feeling they want to. Because most people don't know how to shift from the natural state that they feel this situation has made them get into. This traffic jam has stressed me. They don't realize it's not completely true, and we'll come to that later on why that isn't absolutely true. And they have no idea how they can actually take charge to shift their state. But these are things that we are going to be digging into and teaching you how to do. There's an interesting phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is a situation where people find themselves in a difficult situation. Quite often it can be a really serious thing, like a serious life-threatening illness, a real crisis in their life of some sort. And although it knocks them back, there's an interesting response they have, which is later on, as they kind of bounce back from it, they will talk about this event. Let's say they've had cancer, and they'll say, you know what, I wish that had never happened, but weirdly, I think if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be where I am now. And my life has taken such an amazing, incredible direction that it needed to. And I needed that wake-up call. I needed to see what the world in this way. So in a strange way, I'm kind of thankful and grateful for that experience, awful as it was, because it's helped me to step into this new version of myself. So this is post-traumatic growth. The opposite is just kind of becoming fixed, where something bad happens and you start to judge the world by going, this has happened, everything else is going to go downhill from now on. So post-traumatic growth is about bouncing back and learning from the experience. there's another interesting question that I've often asked and people often ask me, which is, so we talk a bit about stress. We know that stress produces all sorts of hormones in our body, adrenaline and cortisol specifically. And that's not very good for you. And yet they say, I go on roller coasters, like a theme park, and I love it. I can go on those all day long. It's scary, it's crazy, it's wild, twists and turns. And at the end of the day, I feel great. Why is that? Because I thought stress was supposed to not be very good for you. Turns out there's some extra bits of information that we need to add to this. Two people experiencing the same situation side by side can have absolutely different versions of it. One may experience it as a threat. And this means they see the situation, they experience it, and they think to themselves, you know what, I don't think I've got the resources, the skills, the talents, the abilities to deal with this. This is like too much for me to deal with. And their body will change its physiological response. They'll produce adrenaline, but it will have an effect to raise their blood pressure. Whereas the person next to them, if they see it as this a challenge or an adventure, an opportunity, like, oh, this is exciting, I wonder what I can do with this. I have the resources, the skills, the capabilities to deal with this. They'll still produce adrenaline, about the same amount, but their blood pressure will actually lower. So it really depends on how are you perceiving this event. Do you see it as a threat, danger, or do you see it as an opportunity or an adventure? And that's another thing we're going to be looking at. How do we perceive and experience the world? Because we often can't change what's going on around us, but what we can do is change how we are reacting to it. And that brings me on to this interesting question I said I was going to talk to you about in relationships, a question that you want to avoid at all costs. So I promised I would talk about one of the most important questions that you need to avoid in relationships. And it's a very tiny question, and it's the why question. Now, you may think the why question is a reasonable question, and sometimes it is. Where it becomes problematic, it's where it's used in this way. Somebody has not done their job of taking out the trash. Okay, they've got to take out the bins, the rubbish, the garbage, the trash, and they haven't taken it out. And so you say to them, why didn't you take out the trash? Now, what's interesting about this why question is you're not actually interested in the answer at all. What you're really saying is, I just want to tell you, you got this wrong, you're wrong, and you failed to do the things that you said you were going to do. Now, as referenced earlier, what happens when we tell someone they're wrong? Well, they don't normally go, thank you very much, I'm glad you pointed that out, of course I will amend my ways and take out the trash. No, what they normally do is they go, all right, okay, well, if you're going to attack me on that level, I'm going to respond by pointing out your flaws. You probably had these conversations where they say, well, why haven't you done the And then they go, why haven't you done this? Well, that's not the same. And now it's starting to become very much like back in the day when your parents were driving in the front and you were sitting in the back arguing, and there's going, she started it, I started it, he didn't. Yeah, very, very petty conversations start to trigger with the why question. So avoid the why question unless you want to have arguments. They are a perfect way to create arguments. The other interesting thing, of course, is in that situation, we talked about states earlier, one person is already in a bad state, like, why haven't you done this thing? And suddenly the other person is thrown into a bad state because they feel like they're being attacked. And now we have two people in bad states. And when two people in bad states try and communicate, it normally doesn't work very well. One of the things we're going to be looking at is how do you maintain your state when somebody, a good state, when somebody is not in such a good state? Because one of the interesting things about states, and this is worth writing down, is states are contagious. So this means if you're hanging around people who are in good states, we have these little things called mirror neurons, which we'll talk about later on, that are designed to make you and whoever you're talking to feel like you're on the same page. So our accents and gestures will match people that are near us. this says that we're not a threat. We can trust us because evolutionary, being with people is a very good survival technique, having been part of a gang, being part of a tribe. So if somebody is in a happy state, you'll have these little neurons that will pick this up and you'll feel in a happy state. But equally, of course, and we've all experienced this, I'm sure, when you hang around somebody who's stressed, overwhelmed, or down all day long, you start to feel your mood dropping too. And this is because states are contagious. So then the question is, what do you need to do to contage people around you with a great state? And we're going to be talking about that. How do you get yourself into a great state? Back to our why question. Any guesses on the solution for the why question? Well, there's two main solutions. One is don't say it, just avoid it. As soon as you feel yourself going, but why? Just stop. Unless you really want to have an argument, because that's what you're inviting them for. Pause for a second and think about the how question that could replace it. So the how question is, let's say, this taking out of the bins has been a problem over a while. Instead of going, why haven't you taken them out again? Instead, you'd say something like, okay, I'm noticing this keeps on happening and I'm getting, not in a good space about it. So how can we resolve this? What solutions can we come up with? And the cool thing about this is the why question refers to blame, who's at fault, and the past. So stuff that's already happened. They haven't taken out the bins. They didn't pick up the laundry. They didn't do the shopping. Those things are past. We can't really do much about events. If you say, like, why didn't you do this 3 days ago? That's such a pointless conversation because they didn't. And if it was time sensitive, it can't be done now. The how question looks at, well, how can this be different in the future? How can we move forwards in a different way? Looks at solutions, looks at opportunities, and it looks at changing the future. So many people are locked into the why question. So many people are locked into what's gone before. And of course our past is important. It does influence who we are and how we think. But what's really important is that our past does not predict our future anymore. That we learn from it, we move from it into a future that we design rather than our past designs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pause again, and as you pause this time, I'd like you to reflect, maybe look through your notes and skip through the video if you want, on what are the key things that you've learnt in this first unit. We've covered loads of stuff, lots of really interesting stuff that we'll be coming again and again to in the 9 units that follow. So pause for a minute, check in with yourself. What have I learned? What's been particularly captivating? What do I think? Oh, that's really interesting. That will make a difference. What's transforming? What's waking you up? What are you thinking? Yeah, I can see how I can use that. Or that's opened my eyes about something. Come back in a minute. I'm going to talk you through the main points we've covered, describe them, discuss them, and finish this hour's session. So we're coming to the end of the first hour. What are the most important things that you've come across today that you've learned? Well, I don't know what it might be. I mean, it might be where we started right at the beginning, talking about this whole idea of there is stuff that we learnt at school that was relatively useful and sometimes not useful, and stuff they never covered on the curriculum, which are the things we really need. And that's kind of what this course is all about. Really simple, effective, practical ways for you to make change. Then you may remember we looked at the NASA guy, and that shows us all sorts of interesting things, and we'll come back to it again in later modules. One of the things it really shows is how we can completely change our worldview. So that idea of gravity just being, well, of course, when you drop things, they fall, that you could forget that is pretty amazing just by going up into space and experiencing something different. And then when you come back down to Earth, you've forgotten that gravity exists on Earth. Pretty amazing stuff. Not only did he forget gravity exists, when he let go of it and it fell, he was surprised, but then he wasn't sure where it would be. I mean, that is pretty phenomenal, isn't it? We talked about the importance of stories, and the NASA astronaut is a great example of a story, just by me saying, remember the NASA guy? You remember the whole conversation about it, not just what you saw, but of course what that means in terms of how we can change, how we can see the world, how we can get stuck. Because it's also not only talking about change, is it? It's also talking about he's got stuck in an inappropriate way of thinking about the world because the gravity on space station is just not useful, that worldview, when you're back in the world. And we as humans can get into those kind of programs. And that brings us to the next thing, which is NLP. Neuro, how our nervous system works. It's communicating constantly, both within our body and with other people. The L for linguistics, the power and importance of language and non-verbal communication, things we say and do. So, of course, a classic example of non-verbal communication is when at the end of a date, someone says, "Listen, Phil, I've had a lovely time. You're a really interesting person." But we can hear that but coming a mile off. And what's coming next, there's an interesting phrase about this, which is everything that goes before the but is bullshit. So if you go, "Look, I really like you," but you're now going to tell them something that you don't like about them. Or, "I'd like to meet up with you, but I'm not going to be able to." So we notice this, we hear that in the intonation of the voice. We've got a real antennae for all these kind of things called incongruities, where we say something and it doesn't quite match with the way that we're saying it. So linguistics is about our language, how we speak to ourselves, how our nervous system communicates to us, to our body, how we communicate to other people, both with words and with our non-verbal language. We've also looked at how this course is a standalone 10 units, which will train you in loads of really fascinating stuff you can put into practice in your life, in your work, everything that you do. We also talked how this course is a standalone 10-unit course, which will teach you some extraordinary skills of NLP and coaching you can apply to your life, your work, your relationships, and it really will transform so much stuff. But we've also talked how this is a building block to a larger course, because this is not a practitioner course, but forms the very early stages of a practitioner course when you become a practitioner to really help people transform their lives. So if you want to take the practitioner course, obviously get in touch with us. But by doing this is the first building block, and use that in the rest of the course as a kind of starting point. Next, we looked at that interesting exercise with those bizarre questions, all about how does your brain work. And we found that to remember the colour of our room, we go on a little search inside of our head to remember when we were young and what we wanted to do. We take ourselves back in our kind of mental time machine. And also we asked you about a specific important momentous event, a big event in your life. And by going back there, again, it produces those feelings. This is really core, because this is teaching us that we can travel kind of in time in our memories. And by connecting with those memories, we can shift our state. And we're going to use this later on in the course to teach you how to shift your state in lots and lots of different ways. We also looked about our postcode backwards. So our postcode backwards is a really, really interesting conversation, because, of course, we've got this new neurology that we're trying to access, and we notice how clunky it is, and that's the process of change. It gives us an understanding of what it feels like to try and change, and with practice, how that becomes simple and easy. We also looked at this idea that people don't follow rules very much, which is really important to know if you hang around people, because when people don't follow rules, don't be surprised. Don't let that break you out of the state that you want to be in. And of course, this leads us to the whole concept of states. What state are we in? We're always in a state. The question is the state you're in the most useful for what you're doing? And for most of us, the answer is no. We're a lot of the times not in very good states. We're in anger, frustration, so on. But being in the right state, it's probably the most important thing you could ever do. Marcus Aurelius, the great emperor, Roman emperor and orator, said, "You can judge the quality of a man's life by the quality of his thoughts." What you're thinking, what state you're in, will change how you deal with the world. So your state becomes of paramount importance. We also noticed that some people connected with really great memories, really powerful memories, but how often do you connect with that? And often do you spend time thinking about things that aren't so useful? We've got this amazing brain. We need to use it in ways that benefits us and our health and our well-being. And we're going to be looking at that, about how you can train yourself to make sure that you're using your brain in a way that is really, really useful for you. And finally, the last thing we looked at was the why question. I really recommend, if you're in a relationship, ditch the why question, unless you want to have lots of arguments. Much more useful to pause and look at the how question, to check in with your state, to ask yourself, is the state I'm in now, is this what I want to be spreading? Is this what I want to be contaging people with? Because one of the things we can do is we can change ourselves and the people around us just by changing our own state. We can certainly infect people with not so good states. Equally true that we can improve the environment and the relationship in just by changing our state. So check in with yourself. Notice what you have learned, what's most important for you, and particularly this whole thing of states. Ask yourself, what have I learned about states? Where for me am I in not very good states? Where for me am I in a state that is not very good and is really affecting other people? Where am I affected by other people's states? Could I change how I deal with that? And not just moving from a not very good state to an okay state. What if we could take it a few steps further to shift into an amazing state? The best state, the most appropriate state for whatever you're doing. What would life be like if you could really master that skill? And you probably know people who do that, who are like, they just seem to get themselves in the zone. You know, peak performance, athletes, people who are on stage, get themselves in the zone. And when they do, that's where the magic happens. What if you could do that in your life? You could really get yourself in the state that you need to be in. Well, we're going to be looking at loads of ways that you can achieve that, a whole range of stuff. This is just the first baby step on this course. If you want to know more, then come and join me on units 2 to 10, where you can really develop your incredible skill set and how you can use NLP and also coaching, which we haven't really talked about yet, on yourself and start to bring it into your world. So look forward to seeing you on the next unit.